The president of the HOA went so far as to call 911 simply because I challenged her meticulously controlled domain. But she was completely unaware that my son was about to arrive in his official uniform. Allow me to set a scene that is sure to make you furious. There I was, standing in my own driveway on a Tuesday morning, not bothering anyone, when the deep growl of diesel engines shattered the calm of our residential street. A pair of squad cars appeared as if I were some high-profile fugitive. The sharp scent of engine exhaust mingled with my morning coffee as heavy boots crunched on the gravel driveway, and standing there was Karen Whitfield, our neighborhood's self-crowned tyrant, literally bouncing on her feet and pointing at me with her impeccably polished fingernails. This woman had dedicated 6 months to making my existence miserable with fabricated violations, harassing letters, and now she was yelling at the police officers. "Arrest him! He's ruining our community. His illegal fence is a threat." An illegal fence? The very same fence that had cleared 3 official inspections and adhered to every single HOA regulation precisely. The officer in charge exited his vehicle, a tall and commanding figure with his hand resting near his radio. Karen was so engrossed in her dramatic portrayal of a victim that she failed to see him crack a smile upon seeing me. She frantically waved documents in the air like a deranged academic, her voice reaching a shrill, glass-shattering frequency that made you instinctively want to protect your ears. Then, Officer Torres turned completely, and a wave of pride washed over me. "Hi, Dad. What seems to be the problem here?" Karen's face paled to a shade matching her costly BMW. "It seems that when you spend months lodging false police complaints against an individual, it's wise to first verify if their child wears a badge and possesses the authority to make arrests. What would you do if your HOA president used the police as a weapon against you for adhering to the rules? Leave a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from tonight. My name is Marcus Torres, and until 14 months ago, I believed I had my life completely sorted. I had 28 years as a union electrician, 3 children who grew up to be good people, and a wife who had the ability to make even my most difficult days feel bright. Sarah and I purchased our small ranch home in Willowbrook Estates 8 years ago. It was her vision to reside in a place that was safe and tidy, where our children could ride their bicycles without having to swerve around potholes. Sarah died last spring. Cancer claimed her swiftly, as if it were in a great rush, leaving me to wander through this house surrounded by nothing but memories and Buddy, our old golden retriever, who still sits by the door each evening as if she might come home. My children did their best to support me. Cameron is 29 now, a detective with the county sheriff's department. He inherited my stubbornness and his mother's strong sense of justice. Alexis, at 26, is a nurse downtown and is almost too clever for her own good. Tyler, the youngest at 22, is completing his college degree with an engineering scholarship. They all urged me to sell the house and relocate closer to one of them. But this home still carries the scent of Sarah's lavender soap in the main bathroom, and I couldn't bring myself to part with that. The HOA appeared benign enough when we first moved in. $1,200 annually to maintain the common grounds, look after the small playground, and manage the clubhouse where no one ever really hosted any functions. The regulations were straightforward. Keep your lawn mowed, don't paint your house a fluorescent green, and don't leave boats parked in your driveway. Fundamental things that any considerate neighbor would do anyway. Then Karen Whitfield opted to find a new pastime. Karen has served as the HOA president for 6 consecutive years, largely because she is the only one fanatical enough to desire the position. She is 48, wedded to a real estate attorney named Preston, and operates a white BMW X5 with custom license plates that read Horace. I'm not joking, their residence is a huge colonial, 4,800 square feet of perpetual construction clamor because Karen is perpetually improving something. However, Karen's true skill is not in home improvement. It is in discovering novel and imaginative methods to make your life a misery while claiming she is upholding community standards. The issues began subtly. Karen would patrol the streets in her BMW, clipboard ready, using a physical ruler to check lawn height. She would monitor the timing of people's sprinkler systems to find violations of watering ordinances that didn't actually exist, but her main activity was taking pictures. Countless, obsessive photos of trash cans placed 6 inches out of line, holiday lights left up a day too late, or cars parked at slightly off-kilter angles in their own driveways. The tipping point arrived last October when I chose to put up a privacy fence in my backyard. It was nothing extravagant, Just a 4-foot cedar fence to allow Buddy to roam without my having to worry about him straying into the road. I reviewed the HOA guidelines, obtained quotes from 3 contractors, secured the necessary permits. I did it all by the letter of the law. The fence was erected on a Wednesday. By Thursday morning, Karen was striding down my walkway in her designer heels, tape measure and clipboard at the ready. The aroma of fresh cedar mixed with her overpowering perfume, a floral assault that likely cost more than my power bill. "This fence," she declared, brandishing perfectly smooth legal documents, "violates our aesthetic harmony clause." I retrieved my copy of the HOA rules and gestured to Section 4(2), which specified clearly that fences under 4 feet did not require approval. Karen's nostrils flared like a provoked stallion. "The rules," she stated, her lips drawn so tightly they could crack walnuts, "are subject to interpretation by the board." "You mean subject to interpretation by you?" I retorted, "since you are the board." It was then that I was introduced to Karen's go-to phrase, 72 hours or a $500 daily fine. I presented contractor invoices, permit paperwork, and city inspection clearances. It made no difference. Karen threatened to convene an emergency board meeting to amend the rules retroactively because it seemed that being the HOA president granted you the power to invent new laws anytime your feelings were hurt. That fence became Karen's fixation. Each morning at precisely 7 a.m., she would march by my home, capturing images of it from multiple perspectives as if she were compiling evidence for a criminal trial every afternoon. She would remeasure its height, perhaps hoping it had miraculously grown overnight into a violation. But the fence was only the prelude. Karen had identified her new favorite target, and she was merely getting started. December came, and I had hoped the holiday season might divert Karen's attention to other matters. Sarah had always put a lot of effort into Christmas. Not excessively, but in a warm, inviting way, lights tracing the roofline, a wreath on the door, perhaps some garland on the porch columns. Simple touches that made the house feel vibrant once more. I was on a ladder the Saturday after Thanksgiving, attaching LED lights to the gutters, when I heard the distinct click-clack of designer heels on the pavement. Karen materialized at the edge of my driveway, like a predator in designer clothing, clipboard clutched to her chest. "Those lights," she announced, forgoing any form of greeting, "are excessive." I glanced around. My decorations were understated compared to the house 2 doors away, which resembled the aftermath of a casino explosion. Across the street, the Johnsons had inflatable reindeer that were likely visible from orbit. Yet, my simple strand of warm white LEDs was apparently the primary threat to social order. "Excessive in what way?" I inquired. Descending the ladder, Karen shuffled through her documents with a dramatic flair. "The energy conservation guidelines explicitly state that holiday displays must not surpass reasonable consumption standards. The thing about HOA rules is that they are meant to be documented somewhere." I had read our community guidelines cover to cover on 3 separate occasions. There was no energy conservation clause, no mention of reasonable consumption standards. Karen was fabricating rules on the fly. "Show me that rule," I challenged. "It's being drafted," she countered, which is HOA jargon for, "I'm going to create this rule as soon as I leave your property." She presented me with a violation notice, already completed, as if she had prepared it before even laying eyes on my lights. A $200 per day penalty starting December 20th if I failed to adhere to the energy conservation guidelines. The notice was signed by Preston Whitfield, attorney at law. The scent of fresh cedar from my fence mingled with Karen's overpowering perfume as she stood there, anticipating my submission. Instead, I did something that was clearly not part of her plan. I smiled. That evening, I took a stroll through the neighborhood. Karen's house looked as though the North Pole had vomited on it, with thousands of multicolored lights, animated figures, and a light show set to music audible 3 blocks away. The Hendersons had icicle lights hanging from every available surface. The Malones featured a 12-foot inflatable Santa with a light-up sleigh. None of them had violation notices affixed to their doors. I spent that weekend conducting research, the kind I had become adept at over 28 years of navigating building inspectors and city officials. It turned out the city had no regulations on holiday lighting, provided you weren't causing traffic issues or breaking electrical codes. My union experience came into play. Always verify the actual regulations, not what a superior claims they are. I also made an interesting discovery about Preston Whitfield. A brief check on the State Bar Association website revealed he was not licensed for HOA law in our county. His area of expertise was commercial real estate, and he had never managed a homeowners association case in his career. Yet he was more than willing to put his law firm's letterhead on Karen's concocted violations. Two could play at the research game. I started a group text with 12 neighbors, naming it the Willowbrook Resistance. It was nothing over the top, just a method for coordination. Hey, is anyone else being hassled by Karen about Christmas lights? Let's all turn on our displays at 6:00 p.m. sharp on Tuesday. On Tuesday evening, 12 houses across 3 streets lit up in unison. It was a beautiful sight. A neighborhood coming together in the simple act of celebrating the holidays. The aroma of hot chocolate wafted from the Martinez's front porch, where they had established a small cocoa station for the children. The sound of laughter reverberated off the frosty lawns as families emerged to view our synchronized display. Karen's BMW came roaring around the corner as if she were responding to a major emergency, but here's what truly irritated her perfectly lotioned skin. She couldn't issue violation notices to everyone at once without admitting to selective enforcement, and if she attempted to challenge the entire neighborhood, she would have to apply her fictitious energy conservation rule to her own home, which was consuming more power than a small retail center. The following morning delivered Karen's countermove. I discovered a new type of notice in my mailbox. She had contacted the city's code enforcement office, reporting a fire hazard at my residence. She informed them I was using illegal electrical wiring that endangered the neighborhood. The inspector who arrived was Rick Gonzalez, a man I had worked with on union projects 15 years prior. Rick glanced at my professional grade setup. Properly sealed connections, GFCI protection, load calculations exceeding safety requirements, and simply shook his head. Marcus, this is the most meticulous holiday lighting job I've inspected all season, he remarked, taking out his inspection tablet. Whoever reported this was wasting city time. Then Rick shared something that sent a chill down my spine. His voice lowered to the cautious tone inspectors use for off-the-record comments. You're the 4th call I've had this month from this area. Same person complaining each time, a lady who keeps making false safety claims. That's when it dawned on me that Karen wasn't just being petty. She was manipulating city services, lodging false reports to harass neighbors she disliked, and if she was doing it to me, she was likely doing it to others. Filing false reports with city departments can lead to significant legal trouble if someone chooses to contest it. A fact I stored away for later. The sound of extension cords being connected in the frigid winter air became the anthem of our defiance. Each evening, more homes participated in our synchronized light show. Karen would drive past in her BMW, its engine revving in frustration, her face, visible through the windshield, contorted in what looked like extreme aggravation. But there was nothing she could do. 12 households were following the exact same rules she had attempted to wield against me. It was the beautiful irony of community solidarity, illuminated by Christmas lights, except Karen was never one to retreat from a confrontation. And I had a gut feeling that the Christmas lights were merely her first act. January ushered in a cold spell that made everything feel fragile. The air, the ground, and evidently Karen's patience. I had mistakenly believed that the holiday season might have exhausted her fixation on my fence and lights. I was mistaken. Karen had simply been regrouping, plotting her next move against my tranquil life. The offensive arrived under the guise of community enhancement. A notice materialized in every mailbox, heralding the establishment of the Leash Law Enforcement Committee. This committee was composed of Karen Whitfield as chairwoman and her devoted accomplice, Martha Pembroke, a 70-year-old busybody who dedicated her retirement to timing how long people left their garbage bins by the road. Their initial target was my 12-year-old golden retriever, Buddy. Now, Buddy is about as threatening as a plush toy. His daily schedule consists of 18 hours of sleep, eating, and the occasional stroll onto the front lawn to fetch the morning paper while I observe from the porch with my coffee. He has never been off his leash without supervision, never troubled a single person, and his most heinous act against humanity is shedding on the furniture. Yet, according to Karen's newly created pet policy, Buddy was a public menace. The violation notice came on a Tuesday, delivered in person by Karen herself. She stood at my front door in her high-end snow boots, clipboard held against her puffy winter jacket like a shield. The document she gave me charged Buddy with aggressive off-leash behavior in contravention of community safety standards. He went onto my lawn, I stated, reading the ridiculous allegations, to get the newspaper while I was standing 10 feet away. Karen's breath formed small clouds in the frigid air as she spoke. The leash law is very clear. All animals must be restrained at all times when not within the owner's fenced property. What leash law? I inquired. Show me where that is written. She indicated a paragraph in the notice that cited established community pet policies as outlined in the safety addendum. It was another fabricated rule. Karen was becoming quite inventive with her imaginary regulations. $300 fine, she proceeded, plus a mandatory pet behavioral assessment by a certified animal specialist. That will be an extra $400. The scent of January snow mingled with her perfume as she stood there, expecting me to buckle under the pressure of her administrative assault. Instead, I did something that was clearly not in her plan. I took out my phone and began to record, just capturing this for my own records. I said with a grin, "You don't object, do you?" Karen's face turned a shade of red that could have melted the ice on her car windshield. She muttered something about having 14 days to comply and then clicked away down my walkway, her heels finding it difficult to grip the icy pavement. That afternoon, I went to the hardware store, not for pet items, but for security cameras. My years of wiring commercial properties had taught me that the most effective way to counter workplace harassment is through documentation. It's a lesson every contractor learns the hard way when a supervisor attempts to shift blame for their own errors. I spent the weekend setting up a straightforward yet thorough system. For cameras covering the perimeter of my property, all completely legal as they only recorded my own land. The cameras were weather-resistant, motion-sensitive, and automatically backed up to cloud storage. The first results came on Monday morning. Karen's daily patrol was captured in flawless high definition. There she was, trespassing on my property to photograph Buddy's food dish and measure the length of his chain. And here was the best part. She let her own cat wander freely across 3 different yards. Snowball, Karen's immaculate white Persian, was apparently not bound by the same leash law that plagued poor Buddy. The recording showed Snowball hunting birds at the Henderson's bird feeder, using the Martinez's garden as a toilet, and generally breaking every pet rule Karen had devised for others. But Karen's husband, Preston, was not going to let a minor detail like hypocrisy impede their campaign of harassment. 3 days later, I discovered a cease and desist letter in my mailbox, ordering me to take down the security cameras at once. The letter alleged that my cameras were infringing on neighborhood privacy standards and threatened legal action if I did not comply within 72 hours. It was time for some expert advice. My union membership included legal services, so I arranged a call with their lawyer. It turned out that homeowners are permitted to install security cameras anywhere on their property as long as they do not record neighbors' private spaces, which mine did not. The lawyer actually chuckled when I read him Preston's letter. "Tell you what," he said. "Send me copies of everything they've sent you. This appears to be harassment masked as a legal procedure." That's when matters became more interesting. My lawyer's investigation revealed that Preston's law firm was the legal representative for the HOA management company. For every violation fee Karen imposed, Preston's firm received a cut. They weren't just pestering me for entertainment. They were literally profiting from it. I arranged responsible pet owner gathering in the neighborhood park that Saturday. 15 people came with their dogs, 3 of whom had received similar violation notices from Karen's pet patrol. We exchanged stories while our dogs romped in the snow, their breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. It became clear that Karen had been methodically targeting pet owners whose dogs she disliked, which seemed to be every dog except her own cat. The Johnson's lab mix was cited for excessive barking during a thunderstorm. The Malone's elderly beagle was ticketed for aggressive posturing when it wagged its tail at a neighbor's child. But here is where Karen made her first significant error. In her eagerness to persecute Buddy, she had lodged a formal complaint with the county animal control office, asserting that my dog was a public safety risk. She had also sent copies of her violations to the city, demanding they look into my negligent pet ownership. What Karen was unaware of was that animal control maintains thorough records of all complaints, and when you file numerous false reports, particularly against the same individual, it begins to look less like civic concern and more like harassment. The crunch of January snow under our feet became the soundtrack of our unofficial resistance meeting. as dog owners shared tales, compared Karen's absurd citations, and gradually understood they were not alone in facing her manufactured crises. By February, Karen's pet patrol had failed spectacularly. Animal control had investigated her claims and found no evidence of dangerous dogs in our community. In the meantime, 3 neighbors had lodged countercomplaints regarding Snowball's destructive wandering. But if I believed Karen would retreat after losing the pet battle, I clearly hadn't been observing her methods. A woman who summons the police over Christmas lights is not going to give up simply because her fabricated pet rules were debunked. She was already orchestrating her next attack. And this time, she was taking direct aim at my finances. March came with the bittersweet aroma of melting snow turning to mud, and I naively believed that perhaps Karen's campaign of harassment was also beginning to thaw. The winter had been harsh on everyone's lawns, leaving the typical mosaic of brown patches and dead grass that is characteristic of Michigan weather. Most sensible people would wait until spring truly arrived before concerning themselves with landscaping. Karen Whitfield, however, had never been known for her reason. The notice arrived in my mailbox on the first day the temperature reached 50 degrees. Spring Beautification Standards Initiative. It announced on elegant letterhead that likely cost more than my monthly power bill. According to Karen's latest creation, all front yards were required to meet professional landscaping criteria by April 30th or be subject to daily fines of $150. The specifications read like something from a high-end garden center's catalog. Particular types of non-native flowers, imported decorative rocks, professional-grade mulch, and irrigation systems that would be the envy of a golf course. The projected cost was a minimum of $2,300, according to the 3 approved vendors listed at the bottom of the notice. I took a walk around the neighborhood that evening, assessing the damage the winter had inflicted on everyone's lawns. The Hendersons had the same patchy grass as I did. The Malones' flower beds were in disarray. Even Karen's own yard had brown spots beneath her elaborate light display, although I noted her property was not among those receiving violation notices. But what really captured my attention was that every single approved vendor on Karen's list was charging exorbitant prices for plants that would have a hard time surviving in our climate. These were not native Michigan plants that were suited to our soil. They were costly ornamental types that would require constant watering, special fertilizers, and would likely not survive the following winter. My union experience had trained me to recognize a con when I saw one. 28 years of dealing with contractors attempting to sell unnecessary upgrades gives you an instinct for it. This whole beautification project reeked of kickbacks and inflated costs. So, I did what any rational person would do. I looked into actual landscaping solutions that were practical. Native plant gardening, as it happens, is not only more affordable but also better for the environment. Michigan boasts dozens of beautiful native species that flourish in our soil without needing constant upkeep. Even better, the city was offering rebates for drought-tolerant landscaping as part of its water conservation initiative. I created a landscaping plan that used native wildflowers, prairie grasses, and local shrubs. The total cost, after city rebates, came to $380. It would be beautiful, demand little maintenance, and benefit local wildlife rather than depleting the water supply to keep foreign flowers alive. The aroma of fresh mulch and new possibilities filled my garage as I organized seed packets and native plant guides. This could actually be an enjoyable project, creating something Sarah would have adored while defying Karen's costly demands. I collaborated with Jerry Martinez, the owner of the local nursery who offered discounts to veterans. Jerry had been advocating for native landscaping for years, frustrated by HOAs that insisted on water-guzzling lawns instead of sustainable gardens. When I showed him Karen's list of approved vendors, he simply chuckled. "Those guys charge 3 times the price of native plants," he said, placing trays of native wildflowers in my truck. "And half of their suggested species will perish in Michigan winters. Your plan is far more intelligent than anything I've seen from those high-end landscaping firms." By mid-March, I had established a neighborhood bulk purchasing group. 8 families combined their orders for native plants, mulch, and seeds, reducing everyone's expenses by 40%. The sound of neighbors planting gardens together, exchanging tips on soil types and plant placement, felt like a true community in action. Then Karen arrived to put a stop to it. She appeared at my front door on a Thursday evening, holding her clipboard like a shield, accompanied by 2 men in expensive suits. The taller one identified himself as Preston, her lawyer husband, while the shorter one gave me a business card that named him the landscape compliance coordinator. for the management company. Your proposed landscaping, Karen declared, does not meet traditional aesthetic compliance standards. The beautification committee rejects your native plant submission. I glanced at Preston, then at the compliance coordinator and back at Karen. What beautification committee? You mean yourself. The committee, she reiterated, her voice acquiring the brittle quality it took on when her authority was challenged, has concluded that native landscaping results in an inconsistent neighborhood appearance. Residents are required to use approved vendors for approved plant varieties. That's when I understood that Karen's scheme was even more extensive than I had initially thought. She wasn't just insisting on expensive landscaping. She was mandating specific contractors who were likely giving her kickbacks for the business. Every homeowner compelled to spend $2,300 meant more money funneled through Karen and Preston's network. But Karen had made a critical error. In her haste to devise another lucrative plan, she had created requirements that were in violation of city environmental regulations. Her approved plant list contained several species that were actually restricted because of their invasive nature. Her irrigation demands violated municipal water conservation laws that had been in effect for 2 years. I had learned something significant during my research on drought-resistant landscaping. Many cities now provide rebates and incentives for native plant gardens precisely because they lower water consumption and support local ecosystems. Our city government was actively promoting the very type of landscaping that Karen was attempting to prohibit. The following morning, I made an anonymous call to the city's water conservation department, reporting an HOA that was forcing residents to break municipal water restrictions. I enclosed copies of Karen's beautification standards and her approved vendor list, with all their water-intensive, non-native requirements. 3 days later, Karen received a violation notice of her own from the city. It turned out that her own yard was in breach of 3 different municipal water restrictions she was unaware of. Her automatic sprinkler system was watering during forbidden times, using restricted spray heads, and maintaining a lawn area that exceeded the city's drought guidelines. The irony was almost too perfect. Karen, who had spent months concocting fake violations for everyone else, had been breaking actual laws in her own backyard all along. But instead of taking a lesson from the experience, Karen intensified her efforts. If she couldn't compel me to use her costly contractors, she would find another method to make my life a misery, and given Karen's history, things were bound to get much worse before they got better. April brought an unforeseen assist from the least expected person. My daughter, Alexis, she was visiting for Sunday dinner and was lamenting the privacy rules at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. A discussion about patient records and transparency laws sparked an idea regarding HOA accountability. You know, Dad, she remarked, winding spaghetti on her fork. If hospitals are required to keep detailed financial records that patients can review, I'm willing to bet HOAs have similar obligations. That conversation led me down a path of research that would ultimately change everything. It turns out that homeowners associations are legally mandated by the state to keep thorough financial records, meeting minutes, vendor agreements, and expense reports. Furthermore, any resident has the right to request an inspection of these documents with adequate notice. The HOA is given 30 days to comply or risk legal repercussions. On Monday morning, I prepared a formal request for records to our management company. I asked to see 3 years of financial statements, all vendor contracts, minutes from board meetings, and expense reports for significant projects. This was merely routine transparency that every resident was legally entitled to. Karen attempted to obstruct it right away. She called that afternoon, her voice strained with poorly hidden alarm. The board, she stated, has determined that the financial records contain sensitive information that is protected by executive privilege. Executive privilege. As if she were the leader of a country instead of a petty neighborhood tyrant. Show me where that is stated in our bylaws, I responded, using the same line that had so often vexed her. It's implied in the board's fiduciary duties, she faltered. I gave her 48 hours to provide the documents of her own accord. When she declined, I had my union lawyer dispatch a formal demand letter on law firm stationery. It's remarkable how swiftly executive privilege vanishes when faced with genuine legal threats. The documents were delivered the following Friday in a substantial manila envelope that felt laden with secrets. What I discovered inside was more alarming than I had anticipated. The HOA had been running at a significant deficit for 18 months. We were losing money at a pace that would leave us bankrupt in 6 months. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. Karen had authorized a $47,000 landscaping improvement contract with Prestige Grounds Management, a firm owned by Preston's brother-in-law. The contract supposedly covered common area enhancements, irrigation system upgrades, and seasonal upkeep. I had personally walked every foot of our common areas. None of this work had been performed. Then there was the $23,000 clubhouse renovation, which consisted solely of a new coat of paint and some updated light fixtures. The contractor was another relative in Preston's extended family. But here is what truly enraged me. Karen's collection of violation fees was the sole factor preventing the HOA from complete financial ruin. Every fabricated fine, every manufactured problem, every bogus rule she created. They were all intended to generate income to conceal her family's embezzlement. I laid the documents out on my kitchen table, the scent of fresh ink mingling with my escalating fury. Item by item, expense by expense, the pattern became unmistakable. The Whitfield family had been using our HOA as their personal bank while terrorizing residents to fund their theft. The management company was receiving a 15% commission on all violation collections. It was no surprise they never challenged Karen's increasingly imaginative interpretations of our rules. They were profiting from every fictitious fine she levied. But the most incriminating finding was concealed within the insurance documents. Our HOA's liability insurance had expired 4 months prior due to unpaid premiums. Karen had been running the association without insurance, exposing every homeowner to immense financial risk. If someone were injured in our common areas, we would all be held personally liable for the damages. It was then that I grasped the full extent of Karen's desperation. She wasn't merely power-hungry. She was covering up financial crimes that could land both her and Preston in jail. Every violation notice, every campaign of harassment, every attempt to enforce costly compliance was part of a larger scheme to generate enough funds to hide their activities. The beautiful irony was that Karen's obsession with persecuting me had inadvertently protected me. While she was fixated on my fence and Christmas lights, I had been meticulously documenting everything, constructing a case that could bring down their entire scheme. I made copies of every document and stored them in 3 separate places. Then, I began making phone calls. The State Attorney General's office has a dedicated department for handling HOA fraud cases. They showed great interest in reviewing detailed financial records from a community association that seemed to be systematically defrauding its members. But I also came to a realization that sent a chill down my spine. If Karen found out that I had exposed her financial crimes, she wouldn't just intensify her harassment. She would become dangerous. Desperate people take desperate measures, and Karen Whitfield was on the verge of becoming extremely desperate. The next stage of this conflict wasn't going to be about fence heights or holiday lights. It was going to be about concealing financial crimes, protecting reputations, and dealing with a woman who had already demonstrated her willingness to use false police reports to achieve her goals. I needed support, and I needed it quickly. On Saturday morning, I brewed an extra strong pot of coffee and sent a group text to the Willowbrook Resistance. Emergency backyard meeting, 2 p.m. Bring lawn chairs and an open mind. Trust me on this. By 2:15, 14 neighbors had assembled around my patio table, forming an impromptu council of war that resembled a neighborhood barbecue planning session. The smell of freshly mown grass mingled with coffee and resolve as I laid out the HOA financial documents on the table like strategic maps. Before we begin, I said, what I'm about to share might make you angry. In fact, it should make you angry, but more importantly, it's going to make you want to take action. Dorothy Malone, a retired accountant with keen eyes behind her wire-framed glasses, leaned in. Marcus, you have the look of someone who just found out their accountant has been stealing from them. Close, I answered, more like someone who discovered their HOA president has been stealing from all of us. Over the next hour, I guided them through Karen's financial deception. Dorothy took notes, occasionally letting out a low whistle as the numbers revealed their grim story. Linda Martinez, who worked as a paralegal downtown, asked sharp questions about contract dates and vendor connections. This is systematic fraud, Linda stated, tapping her pen on the vendor contracts. Karen and Preston have been treating the HOA like their personal ATM while inventing violations to cover their theft. The group's mood shifted from curiosity to outrage as the full scope of the Whitfield scheme became apparent. Jerry Martinez, the nursery owner, recognized 2 of the landscaping contractors from Karen's approved list. I know these guys, he said, shaking his head. They charge triple the going rate and do half the work. No one hires them unless they're receiving kickbacks. Dorothy offered to perform a complete forensic audit of the HOA's finances. Pro bono, her accounting firm had experience with several fraud cases, and she knew exactly which red flags to look for. Linda offered to investigate our legal recourse under state HOA laws and consumer protection regulations. Here's what I propose we do, I said, pulling out a legal pad filled with notes from my union days. We need to coordinate a comprehensive response that targets them from multiple directions at once. The plan we formulated over the next 2 hours was elegant in its simplicity. First, everyone would immediately cease paying violation fees, not out of defiance, but because those fees were funding illegal activities. Instead, we would divert that money into a legal defense fund. Linda estimated that if all 14 households redirected their violation payments, we would have over $8,000 for legal expenses within a month. Second, Dorothy would finalize her audit and submit a formal complaint to the State Attorney General's office. These AG offices have specialized HOA fraud units that can initiate criminal investigations, freeze assets, and oust corrupt board members. Third, Linda would file a petition for emergency HOA elections as provided by state law. Karen's failure to conduct proper elections for 3 years was a breach of our bylaws that could render her entire presidency void. Fourth, we would insist that the management company reinstate our expired insurance coverage immediately, or face personal liability lawsuits from every homeowner. But this is where my union organizing background proved invaluable. I had learned that the key to prevailing against entrenched power lies in coordination and documentation. Every neighbor had to document every encounter with Karen, keep every violation notice, and record every board meeting. The beautiful thing about combating corruption, I explained, is that corrupt individuals inevitably create a trail of evidence of their crimes. Karen has been so preoccupied with harassing us that she has documented her own illicit activities. Linda made another interesting discovery during her research. State law mandates that HOA meetings must comply with open meeting statutes, which include providing proper notice to all residents and allowing public access to discussions. Karen had been conducting emergency board meetings in her living room without notifying anyone. Another violation that could nullify her decisions, we established an encrypted group chat for sharing information and coordinating our actions. The sound of phone notifications pinging around the circle became our digital call to arms as neighbors shared photos of violation notices, recorded audio of Karen's confrontations, and documented her daily surveillance. Jerry offered his nursery as a meeting spot if we required a more private location than my backyard. Dorothy recommended that we vary our meeting locations to prevent Karen from discovering our plans. Linda advised everyone to maintain detailed records of all HOA-related interactions for potential legal use. But the most critical element of our strategy was patience. Karen had been running her scheme for years and had grown careless because no one had ever stood up to her. Now that she was facing a united front, she would make errors, and we would be prepared to document every one of them. Remember, I told the group as we concluded the meeting, we're not trying to ruin Karen out of malice. We are defending our community from financial criminals who have been stealing from us while pretending to uphold the rules. The crunch of gravel as cars departed mingled with the evening sounds of a neighborhood that, for the first time, felt united in its cause. For the first time in months, I was not facing Karen's harassment by myself. I had supporters, evidence, and a strategy, but I also had a growing sense that Karen would not go down without a fight. A woman who had used false police reports and safety complaints as weapons would not shy away from escalating her tactics when her criminal operation was threatened with exposure. The next stage of this conflict was not going to be about community organizing and legal paperwork. It was going to be about a cornered predator striking back with everything she had, and knowing Karen, that was going to be very dangerous indeed. May came with the kind of ideal spring weather that makes one forget the harshness of winter. But Karen Whitfield had become a different sort of seasonal problem, one that intensified as the temperatures climbed. Our unified resistance had clearly unnerved her, and an unnerved Karen was a perilous Karen. The initial indication of trouble appeared on social media. I had never been a big user of Facebook, but Alexis was adamant that I should keep an eye on what was being said about our neighborhood situation. It turned out that Karen had been actively shaping her own story on the Willowbrook Estates community page. According to her posts, I was a disgruntled resident leading a rebellion against community standards, thereby endangering the safety and property values of law-abiding homeowners. She had somehow distorted our native plant landscaping project into an eco-extremist scheme, complete with alerts that drought-resistant gardens would attract pests and unwanted wildlife. But Karen's social media efforts were merely the first attack. 3 days later, she filed a police report alleging that I had threatened her with physical harm during a neighborhood encounter that never took place. Her statement claimed that I had cornered her near the mailboxes, made threatening gestures, and warned her to back off. The flaw in Karen's account was my security cameras. I had clear video evidence showing that I had not left my property that day, except for a trip to the grocery store, and that Karen had never been near our mailboxes. But filing false police reports was becoming Karen's go-to move, and she was becoming more audacious with it. My son Cameron called that evening, his voice measured and professional, the way police officers speak when they have to deliver bad news to family. "Dad, I need to give you a heads up. Someone filed a complaint claiming you threatened them. I can't be officially involved, but you should probably start documenting your whereabouts more meticulously." The next escalation came via my former employer. I had been retired for 6 months, but Karen somehow had the bright idea to contact my old union hall and report me for unethical conduct and threatening behavior towards community members. She insisted they investigate my pattern of intimidation and revoke any professional licenses I might still possess. The union representative who contacted me was chuckling by the time he finished relaying Karen's complaint. "Marcus, this woman claims you're operating some kind of neighborhood crime ring. She wants us to discipline you for organizing residents to follow HOA bylaws." I had to read her statement 3 times to even understand what she was complaining about. But Karen's desperation was becoming methodical. She began calling city code enforcement daily with fresh complaints about my property. Noise violations for using a lawnmower at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, zoning complaints alleging I was running an illegal business because neighbors came to my house for planning meetings, and environmental violations claiming I was dumping chemicals because she had seen me watering my native plants. Each false claim forced a city inspector to waste time investigating baseless accusations. Rick Gonzalez, my old union colleague who had inspected my Christmas lights, eventually called me directly. "Marcus, you should know that this woman has filed 17 complaints about your property in the last month." 17? "We've looked into every single one and found 0 violations. At this stage, she's abusing the system." Rick's call was a pivotal moment. Karen was no longer just harassing me. She was squandering taxpayer money and city resources with her manufactured problems. Filing false reports with government bodies is a serious offense, particularly when there is a clear pattern of malicious intent. That's when Karen deployed her ultimate weapon. She and Preston hired a private investigator to conduct an exhaustive background check on my personal life, searching for anything they could use to discredit me or my family. They were looking for any dirt on my finances, my marriage, my children's histories. Anything that could be used in their escalating campaign of harassment. The private investigator they employed made a critical error. He was a former police officer who recognized Cameron's name from the reports Karen had been filing. Instead of conducting surveillance on our family, he contacted Cameron directly to warn him about the scheme. "Detective Torres, this is Jake Mitchell, a private investigator. I need to speak with you about your father. Someone has hired me to find information on your family, but I believe you should be aware of what is happening here." Jake had been in law enforcement for 15 years before going private, and he knew a harassment campaign when he saw one. He had, in fact, investigated Karen in 2 other areas where she had used similar tactics against former neighbors. Apparently, the Whitfields had been executing the same strategy in different communities for over a decade. "Your dad is not the first person she's done this to," Jake informed Cameron. "I have files on 3 other neighborhoods where she carried out identical schemes. It's always the same method: fabricated violations, bogus rules, harassment campaigns, and then private investigators when people resist." Jake gave Cameron proof of Karen's history of targeting neighbors she disliked, filing false reports, and resorting to threats and private surveillance when her victims fought back. It was a pattern of criminal conduct that spanned multiple communities and several years. But what truly concerned me was that Karen's behavior was becoming increasingly unpredictable and public. The woman who had once been calculating and systematic in her harassment was now making desperate moves that left her vulnerable to serious legal repercussions. She was trapped, and trapped animals are dangerous. The sound of my phone buzzing with updates from neighbors reporting Karen's latest strange actions. Photographing their trash cans at sunrise, measuring their sprinkler coverage, confronting their visitors to record license plates. Created a constant backdrop of rising tension. My union experience had taught me that when management becomes desperate enough to hire private investigators and file false reports, they are ready for a scorched earth approach. They would rather destroy everything than admit they were wrong and face the consequences. Karen Whitfield was about to demonstrate that lesson in the most dramatic fashion possible, and unfortunately, my family was about to be caught directly in the crossfire. June arrived like a breaking fever, and Karen's conduct escalated to levels of desperation that would have been amusing if they weren't so potentially hazardous. The woman who once prided herself on subtle manipulation and bureaucratic tactics had now shed all semblance of reason. Her latest plan was stunning in its sheer nerve. An emergency HOA meeting to have me expelled from the neighborhood entirely. It didn't matter that HOAs lacked the legal authority to evict homeowners for following the rules. Karen had seemingly convinced herself that, with enough signatures, she could compel me to sell my home and leave Willowbrook Estates for good. The meeting announcement arrived in mailboxes on a Wednesday evening, printed on luxurious paper that likely cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Emergency community safety session. It declared, set for the upcoming Saturday at the clubhouse. The agenda listed discussion of resident conduct issues, community safety concerns, and protective measures for law-abiding homeowners. Karen had been actively canvassing the neighborhood for backing, going from door to door with a clipboard and what could only be described as a frantic energy. Neighbors reported that she spoke more rapidly than usual, gestured wildly, and made increasingly bizarre claims about my dangerous influence on community harmony. According to Martha Pembroke, who lived next to the Hendersons, Karen's pitch had morphed into something akin to a conspiracy theory. I was now, apparently, the leader of an anti-HOA extremist faction bent on tanking property values through deliberate rule-breaking and neighborhood unrest. The beautiful irony was that Karen's door-to-door efforts were failing spectacularly. Every neighbor she approached was treated to her increasingly unhinged theories about my supposed transgressions, which, by contrast, made our solid evidence of her financial misconduct seem even more plausible. But Karen wasn't solely depending on community backing for her final move. She had gathered what she likely believed was a formidable legal team. Preston, another lawyer from his firm, and a man who identified himself as a community compliance specialist, but looked more like hired muscle in a low-cost suit. Saturday evening came with the kind of golden light that makes suburban streets look like film sets. However, the mood around our clubhouse was more akin to a courtroom drama. 47 residents attended, marking the highest turnout for an HOA meeting in our community's history. Karen showed up early, arranging her presentation materials with the frenetic precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment 100 times. She had brought charts, printed photos of my property from different angles, and what seemed to be a PowerPoint presentation titled, Protecting Our Community Values. I entered 15 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to begin, accompanied by Dorothy, Linda, and 14 other neighbors who had formed the heart of our resistance. We brought our own boxes of evidence. Dorothy's completed financial audit, Linda's legal research, and 3 years of documented harassment that presented a very different story of who was truly threatening our community. A local newspaper reporter was already present, notepad and camera at the ready. Linda had tipped him off about the HOA corruption story, and he was keen to report on whatever was about to happen. Karen clearly had not anticipated media presence, and the sight of a professional journalist taking notes made her visibly more on edge. This meeting, Karen declared, bringing the session to order with a theatrical air of authority, has been convened to address the grave threat posed by certain residents who have chosen to subvert our community standards through organized opposition to legitimate board authority. She then began her prepared presentation, showing photographs of my fence, my Christmas lights, and my native plant garden as if they were evidence of major crimes. Her voice rose and fell with dramatic effect as she detailed the chaos and division that my rebellious attitude had supposedly brought to our tranquil neighborhood. This individual, she went on, pointing directly at me while Preston nodded gravely beside her, has organized systematic defiance of community rules, encouraged others to violate established standards, and fostered a hostile environment that jeopardizes the safety and property values of law-abiding residents. When Karen concluded her 20-minute speech, Linda calmly stood up and announced that she was recording the event for legal purposes. She noted that residents had the right to document official HOA meetings, particularly when they involved allegations of wrongdoing. Mrs. Whitfield, Linda stated, her paralegal experience evident in her professional tone. Before this meeting continues, I must inform everyone here that this gathering appears to be in violation of several state laws concerning HOA meetings, including proper notice requirements and open meeting statutes. It was at this point that Dorothy came forward with her audit findings. In her clear accountant's voice, she started to read aloud the financial discrepancies she had uncovered. The $47,000 in landscaping contracts for work that was never done, the $23,000 for clubhouse renovations that amounted to little more than a paint job, and the systematically inflated vendor contracts that had lined Preston's family's pockets while draining our community association's funds. Karen's face shifted from confident to pale to bright red as Dorothy systematically deconstructed the Whitfield's financial house of cards in front of 47 witnesses and a newspaper reporter. Preston attempted to interrupt multiple times, asserting that the financial details were privileged and taken out of context, but Dorothy had documentation to support every claim. In conclusion, Dorothy said, adjusting her glasses as she reached the final page of her report, the HOA has been run as a personal enrichment scheme for the board president and her husband, with fabricated violations used to generate income to cover systematic embezzlement of community funds. The room erupted. Neighbors who had been subjected to Karen's harassment campaigns began to share their own experiences. The manufactured pet violations, the bogus landscaping demands, the invented energy conservation rules, every scheme Karen had orchestrated was laid bare before the entire community. That's when Karen made her final, desperate move. She took out her cell phone and dialed 911, claiming a riot was breaking out at the community meeting and demanding an immediate police response to remove disruptive individuals who are threatening community safety. I need police at the Willowbrook Estates clubhouse immediately, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. We have a dangerous situation with residents making threats and causing a public disturbance. Send multiple units. This could turn violent. The beautiful thing about Karen's dramatic phone call was that 47 witnesses heard her file what was clearly a false police report. We were all sitting in folding chairs, discussing financial records. The most menacing thing in the room was likely the stale coffee someone had brewed in the clubhouse kitchen. But Karen had committed to this final performance and was determined to see it through. She stood behind the presentation table as if it were a barricade, with Preston at her side looking like he wished he could vanish. The rest of us waited to see what would happen when the police arrived, expecting a riot, and instead found a community meeting. The sound of approaching sirens in the distance provided the perfect score for Karen's last stand. She had used false police reports as a weapon one too many times, and on this occasion, she had done it in front of dozens of witnesses and a newspaper reporter. Justice, it seemed, was about to arrive in a patrol car wearing a badge, and for once, Karen Whitfield would not be the one pointing the finger when the officers entered that room. The sound of multiple patrol cars arriving in the clubhouse parking lot brought a tense silence that was almost palpable. The idling of diesel engines, the crackle of radio chatter through open windows, and the distinct crunch of gravel under heavy boots as officers neared the building. Karen stood behind her makeshift presentation table like a general poised for battle, her face flushed with a sense of righteous indignation. 3 uniformed officers came through the main entrance, their hands resting casually on their belts, their eyes surveying the room for any signs of the riot they had been dispatched to handle. What they found instead were 47 people sitting quietly in folding chairs, surrounded by financial documents and poster boards that looked more suited to a PDA meeting than a public disturbance. The lead officer, a tall sergeant with graying hair at his temples, scanned the room with the experienced eye of someone who had responded to thousands of calls. We received a report of a disturbance at this address. Can someone tell me what's going on? Karen practically vaulted herself from behind the table, pointing dramatically at me as if identifying a wanted criminal. Officer, thank you for coming so quickly. That man, she declared, her voice taking on the shrill quality it acquired when she was particularly agitated, has been threatening our community, organizing illegal activities, and creating a dangerous situation for law-abiding residents. The sergeant looked from Karen to me, then to the room full of neighbors seated peacefully with notepads and coffee cups. Ma'am, could you be more specific about the nature of these threats? He has been systematically violating community standards, organizing resistance to legitimate board authority, and intimidating residents who try to enforce our rules. Karen persisted, her gestures growing more theatrical with each accusation. He has created a hostile environment that endangers everyone's safety and property values. It was then that the second officer, who had been observing the room, turned around, and my heart swelled with the unique pride only a parent can experience. It was Detective Cameron Torres, in full uniform, complete with sergeant stripes and the confident posture that comes from years of experience and innate authority. "Hi, Dad," he said with a slight smile. "What seems to be the problem here?" The change in Karen's expression was something that 47 witnesses and one newspaper reporter would never forget. The color vanished from her cheeks faster than water down a drain. Her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Preston, standing beside her, looked as if he would rather be anywhere else on the planet. This is, Karen stammered, clearly struggling to comprehend how the officer she had summoned to arrest me had just called me Dad. Cameron maintained his professional composure, taking out his notebook with practiced ease. "Ma'am, you called 911 to report a riot with threats of violence. Can you please specify what threats were made and by whom?" Karen's eyes darted around the room, seeking support from neighbors who were now looking at her with expressions ranging from disbelief to open contempt. The woman who had spent months filing false police reports had finally done so in front of enough witnesses to bring her reign of terror to an end. They. She gestured wildly at our group. "They've been disrupting our community meeting, making accusations, and refusing to follow proper procedures." Linda Martinez stood up slowly, her paralegal experience evident in her calm, professional manner. "Officer Torres, I am Linda Martinez, and I have been recording this meeting for legal documentation. Mrs. Whitfield called this emergency session to demand that Mr. Torres be removed from the neighborhood for supposed rule violations. We responded by presenting evidence of systematic financial fraud committed by Mrs. Whitfield and her husband." She handed Cameron a folder containing Dorothy's audit findings, the documented timeline of harassment, and copies of every false police report Karen had filed over the preceding 6 months. "Mrs. Whitfield has filed 17 false complaints with city agencies, multiple fraudulent police reports, and has been systematically embezzling HOA funds while inventing violations to cover her theft," Linda continued. "Tonight's 911 call appears to be another false report in a documented pattern of abusing emergency services." Cameron examined the documents with the meticulous focus that had earned him respect as a detective. Meanwhile, Karen grew increasingly agitated, realizing that her final gambit had failed spectacularly. "This is a setup," she declared, her voice reaching that glass-shattering pitch. "You are all conspiring against me. This is harassment. I demand you arrest these people for threatening me." The newspaper reporter was furiously taking notes, while his photographer captured Karen's meltdown for the front page of the following week's community section. Dorothy Malone sat calmly in her folding chair, financial documents laid out before her. Like evidence in a courtroom, Cameron looked up from the paperwork, his expression shifting from professional curiosity to serious concern. "Mrs. Whitfield, based on the evidence presented here and the circumstances of tonight's call, I must inform you that filing false police reports is a felony offense under state law." "False reports," Karen's voice cracked. "I called because these people were threatening me. They were disrupting our meeting. They were making me feel unsafe." "Ma'am," Cameron replied calmly, "I have been in this room for 10 minutes. Everyone is sitting quietly, discussing financial documents. There is no evidence of threats, violence, or public disturbance. However, there is clear evidence that you knowingly filed a false emergency report." It was then that Preston finally spoke up, his lawyer's instincts kicking in too late to salvage his wife's predicament. "Officer, perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. My wife was genuinely concerned." "Mr. Whitfield," Cameron cut in, "are you aware that filing false police reports is a criminal offense that can lead to felony charges, especially when there is a documented pattern of abuse?" The room fell silent, save for the sound of Karen's increasingly panicked breathing and the distant hum of patrol car engines still running outside. 47 neighbors watched as the woman who had terrorized their community for years finally faced the consequences of her actions. Cameron took out his handcuffs with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who had performed this action hundreds of times. "Mrs. Whitfield, you are under arrest for filing a false police report. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the Miranda rights echoed through the clubhouse, Karen Whitfield, HOA president, neighborhood dictator, and small-time criminal, was handcuffed and led out past the very residence she had spent months attempting to intimidate into silence. The sound of car doors closing and engines driving away signaled the end of Karen's reign of terror. What was left was a room full of neighbors who had finally witnessed justice being served, a newspaper reporter with the story of a lifetime, and the sweet satisfaction of a community that had stood up to corruption and won. The weeks after Karen's arrest felt like watching a neighborhood awaken from a long, unsettling dream. The sound of handcuffs clicking that night at the clubhouse seemed to have broken a sort of curse that had hung over Willowbrook Estates for months. Karen was formally charged with filing false police reports, a felony that came with potential jail time, as well as harassment and fraud charges that arose from Dorothy's forensic audit. Preston faced disciplinary action from the State Bar Association and lost all his HOA management clients once news of his involvement in the embezzlement scheme got out. Their meticulously built house of cards collapsed more quickly than a planned demolition. Within 60 days, we had elected a new HOA board. With Dorothy Malone as president and Linda Martinez as treasurer, I turned down the nomination for president. I had experienced enough HOA drama to last several lifetimes. The new board's first action was to hire a licensed, bonded management company that actually adhered to state laws instead of inventing them. All of the fraudulent violation fees were refunded in full. $23,000 were returned to residents who had been systematically conned by Karen's manufactured crises. My Christmas light fine, my pet violation penalties, my landscaping compliance fees, every single cent was returned with interest, accompanied by a formal apology from the new board. But the true healing process started 3 weekends later when we hosted what Dorothy called the Unity Barbecue in my backyard. 38 families attended, bringing potluck dishes and stories they had never told before. It turned out that Karen's harassment had not been confined to the more obvious targets. She had been quietly terrorizing people for years, and most residents had believed they were alone in dealing with her fabricated issues. The aroma of grilled burgers mingling with Dorothy's renowned potato salad and the sound of children playing in my backyard created the kind of neighborhood atmosphere Sarah would have cherished. Buddy roamed freely among the guests, finally able to be a normal dog without the threat of violation notices for aggressive tail wagging or intimidating friendly behavior. Jerry Martinez brought native plant seedlings for everyone, transforming Karen's costly landscaping mandates into a community garden project that actually enhanced our environment. Instead of depleting our finances, the Hendersons put up a small lending library where Karen's violation notice box used to be. The Johnsons initiated a tool-sharing program, eliminating the need for every household to own the same lawn equipment. 6 months after the arrest, I received an unexpected call that brought everything full circle. Dorothy and I had started dating. Something about combating corruption together had ignited a romance that took us both by surprise. We had proceeded, slowly and cautiously, both of us carrying the emotional scars that come with losing a spouse. But Sarah's memory felt at ease around Dorothy's gentle strength. "You know," Dorothy said one evening as we sat on my back porch watching Buddy chase fireflies, "Sarah would be proud of what you did, standing up for the neighborhood, uniting everyone, and not letting the bullies win." The new HOA board created the Sarah Torres Memorial Scholarship Fund, using money saved by cutting Karen's unnecessary vendor contracts and inflated management fees. 3 local high school students were awarded scholarships that first year, with plans for more as our community's finances rebounded from the Whitfield embezzlement. I began volunteering at the high school, teaching electrical safety to students in the trade programs. It turned out that 40 years of union experience were quite useful for helping teenagers understand circuit breakers and proper grounding. Plus, it felt good to share practical skills that could help kids build real careers instead of just memorizing facts for tests. The annual Community Safety Day became a Willowbrook tradition, with local first responders teaching everything from CPR to home security. Cameron took part every year, demonstrating proper emergency response techniques and explaining how residents could cooperate with law enforcement instead of working against it. No more false reports, no more manufactured crises, just neighbors helping neighbors stay safe. Karen's legal situation took longer to resolve than anyone anticipated. She ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges and was sentenced to 6 months in county jail, 2 years of probation, and 400 hours of community service. The judge also mandated that she pay restitution to the HOA and prohibited her from serving on any community association board for 10 years. Preston had his law license suspended for a year and paid $50,000 in fines to the State Bar Association. Their house was put on the market 8 months after Karen's arrest and sold quickly to a young family with twins who found the neighborhood peaceful and family-friendly. 3 other communities came forward after reading our story in the newspaper, reporting similar harassment campaigns by Karen in neighborhoods where she had previously lived. It seemed the Whitfields had been running variations of the same scheme for over a decade, always moving on before anyone could mount an effective resistance. The most gratifying justice arrived 18 months later when the HOA received a $125,000 settlement from our former management company's insurance. It turned out they had been systematically defrauding multiple communities, and our documentation helped prosecutors build cases that recovered money for hundreds of families. But the real victory wasn't monetary. It was walking through a neighborhood where children played without restriction, where neighbors conversed without fear of violation notices, and where community gardens thrived in place of harassment campaigns. The sound of laughter at block parties had replaced the click of designer heels on surveillance rounds. My union background had taught me that ordinary people can overcome corrupt systems when they organize, document everything, and refuse to be intimidated. Karen's greatest error was underestimating a neighborhood full of people who were fed up with being bullied and were ready to fight back as one. Looking back, I realized the most significant lesson wasn't about HOA law or financial fraud. It was about community. Sarah had dreamed of living in a place that was safe and clean, where neighbors looked out for one another. It just took a few years and one corrupt HOA president to teach us how to actually create that kind of community for ourselves. So here's what I want you to take away from this. Document everything, know your rights, and never believe you are fighting alone. Someone else in your neighborhood is likely facing the same kind of petty tyranny, and together you are more powerful than any small-time dictator with a clipboard and an inflated sense of importance. Drop a comment sharing your own HOA nightmare story. You're not the only one dealing with petty tyrants who think a little power makes them invincible. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about confronting corrupt authority and achieving victory through persistence and principle. Next week, find out how my neighbor tried to steal my inheritance and ended up losing his own house, because apparently some people never learn that crime doesn't pay, especially when your victim knows how to use a camera and read the fine print. That's all for today's HOA madness. If watching Justice Prevail made your day, hit that like button, share your thoughts below, and make sure you're subscribed. More outrageous neighborhood showdowns are on the way.